Warning. This review is rated PG-13 for strong language and adult themes. Viewer discretion is advised.
Barbarian.
Welcome back to the Dave the Barbarian series retrospective, where I will attempt to go through each and every episode of the series and see how they all hold up. If you need to get up to speed on what the series is and what the overall premise is, be sure to check out the series intro video for all the info you need to know. With all of that said, let's take a look at episode 13, Way of the Dave.
The Jabbers!
So why are we skipping to episode 13 in the first video of the retrospective? Well, because in spite of being the 13th aired episode, Way of the Dave is intended as the series pilot. It's where they introduce all the characters and establish their personalities in such a way as to say, this is supposed to be the first time you're seeing them. This episode was written by Doug Langdale, who's responsible or partially responsible for 8 of the 43 episodes that came out. He's also the series creator, so it makes sense that he'd be the one in charge of introducing all the characters in the way that they would be defined for the rest of the series. The series had a bit of a rotating lineup of writers, but Doug Langdale, Heather Lombard, and Evan Gore were the most synonymous people with putting pen to paper for this show. Before I watched this episode, I seem to remember it not being as snappy as the other episodes because it was too busy establishing character, but those doubts were somewhat put to rest in the very first scene.
Our tale begins in the quaint and slightly soiled land of Udragoth, where Dave the Barbarian undertakes one of the greatest challenges a warrior can face: trying to keep pancakes from sticking.
You are bombarded with joke after joke after joke.
Thanks being mean to breakfast.
Nuh-uh.
Yeah.
Would you stop it?
Sorry, Uncle Oswidge.
Can't you two just pancakes?
My favorite part of this scene is subtle, when Uncle Oswidge says, "Don't make me turn you two into cabbages again."
Don't make me turn you two into cabbages again!
Like this has been a reoccurring issue. This scene alone was reason enough for me to know this episode was going to be good. It's tight, it's quick, and it's got me busting out laughing in the first few seconds. Plus, the juxtaposition of the narrator saying these stupid things in the overdramatic voice is already being established as a trope, and I can't get enough of it. This actually reminds me of my experiences in script writing. Believe it or not, I've been involved in the writing process of a few films, and one of them was a comedy. None of these films have reached any great level of success, but I was part of the team. Comedy comes in a spectrum, and so things that are more subtle, like say Ghostbusters, don't need to have jokes happening all the time, but when it comes to more screwball level comedy, where the story takes a backseat to the humor, it's smart to try and have jokes happen as quickly and as frequently as possible. And that's a lot harder than it may sound. We brainstormed in a boardroom for hours trying to find out how to make mundane scenes more funny. For example, at one point a character is supposed to hand another character a note from their father, so I floated the idea, what if he accidentally hands her his eviction notice instead? And that was just one pitch in a 4-hour brainstorming meeting. It's really hard and takes a lot of time and skill to make something as tightly comedic as this, so I am very impressed with Doug Langdale for his skill in creating scenes like this. It's just a shame the rest of the episode couldn't maintain this momentum. After this, we're introduced to the plot. This episode's premise is that there's this new trend of antler hats running through Udragoth. Candy is desperate to buy into this trend so she's not seen as a hatless loser by her friends Dinky and Cheezette. Isn't Dinky a euphemism for penis? But try as she might, everywhere is sold out of antler hats, or rather that one place that she looks, so Dave recommends they go to Dermaloon, the hat capital of the world. It's a simple enough setup for some hilarity, but unfortunately, hilarity isn't always the case. In spite of the great opening sequence and some other funny zingers, I'm noticing that some of these lines are out and out falling flat. There's a good 30 seconds dedicated to a joke where the shopkeeper, Mrs. Bogmelon, keeps trying to sell Candy a snake and it just doesn't work. Other than when the kid comes in and asks for a hot dog.
I want a hot dog!
Buy me a delicious!
But there's that, then there's the slightly cringe-worthy begging scene where they're asking to go to Dermaloon.
Mom and Dad, can we go shopping at Dermaloon? Can we go, please?
Well, I suppose it'd be okay.
Yay!
And there are other moments in that vein throughout the episode. So yeah, if I'm being honest, the hit to miss ratio isn't great in this episode, but I kinda chalk that up to this being the pilot. They were still working out the kinks of what did and didn't work, so I'll take a stab in the dark and say this episode isn't indicative of the overall series quality. And even then, I've laughed out loud like 7 times, even in the first 3 minutes. I love how they combine the magical with the mundane here when they use the magical cauldron.
I call upon thee to summon forth images of Thrucktar and Glimia, wheresoever they may be.
Please deposit 10 Dreckles for the first 5 minutes.
I told you we don't want to switch long-distance carriers. Oh, sorry.
It's expertly crafted juxtaposition which works to great comedic effect. To be honest, this scene served no real purpose other than to introduce us to Throcktar and Glimea, the king and queen, but they pull off this scene quite well and don't waste too much time. One thing I never noticed, or rather never internalized, is that this is a mixed race family, as the mother is dark-skinned, which would explain Candy's more tanned skin tone. It's not really a relevant detail, it's just an interesting detail. It's interesting to note that Uncle Oswich has a similar skin tone to Glimea, which tells me that he's the uncle on her side. It makes me wonder how Oswich reacted to Throcktar courting her. Was he supportive of their relationship, or did he turn Throcktar into a stoat trying to protect his sister? It's questions like this that make me sad this series got cancelled after one season. So they get their parents' permission to go to Dermaloon and we're off to the races. After that, it's kind of a nothing scene where they establish a bunch of things. Faffy's the dragon with the tendency to kill Dave every now and again.
Jabbers.
Oh, there's Dave's catchphrase. Then this episode's running joke, the various bird calls that Dave does, which all end in the exact same way. And also, this episode's primary conflict working against Dave is the fact that he doesn't like being a barbarian.
You gotta start being a real barbarian. You gotta give up stuff like bird calls and needlepoint.
Even origami?
Which is the most basic of setups that this series can muster given its premise, but it's the pilot, so I'll give it a pass. It needs to establish the foundation before it can get more creative with its setting and characters. Following this, we waste no time getting into the primary conflict of the episode. They go to Dermaloon and the place is empty, but Candy still finds what she's looking for. Then we find out why the city's empty. A dark cloud appears to dramatically usher in the arrival of the episode's main villain.
The Dark Lord!
Chuckles, the silly piggy!
There he is, ladies and gentlemen, the main antagonist of the entire series. So less than 5 minutes into the episode and we've already reached the climax. I remember back when I was in film school, my writing teacher told us that there's always a way to tell a story within a set time limit. There's a myth that you can't tell a story with a competent beginning, middle, and end within 10 minutes. Well, that's bullshit. You just need to know what to put in and, more importantly, what to omit. It may be hard, but it's always doable, and this series is a great example of this. I do also love the voice Paul Rudd does for Chuckles.
Cut it out, cut it out, cut it out, cut it out! I'm the master of evil! The master of evil!
The slightly high-pitched, exasperated tone is great. It's so hopelessly pathetic for how dramatic he attempts to be. So anyways, he creates a sand monster to fight our heroes. Incidentally, the sand monster was chewing gum, another joke that doesn't really land, and the fight commences. Or it would, but Dave runs for his life.
What was that? If it ain't fish, I ain't interested. That's my motto.
Following this, we get the introduction to Fang's catchphrase.
I'm not a monkey.
And then she directly talks to the camera for a jarring fourth wall break.
Dig me. I just invented sandboarding.
Yeah, so the fourth wall break stuff, I hate it. I used to like fourth wall breaks, but these days I find them to be the absolute laziest form of comedy. It's just pointing to yourself and saying, hey, look how shit I am. I feel like, for the most part, even the most basic of stories should avoid addressing the audience because it kills any semblance of internal consistency for the sake of cheap humor. If you're not Spaceballs, you should not be doing fourth wall breaks. Like, ever. You can like them, that's fine, but for me, I'll take well-constructed writing over cheap fourth wall breaks. Following this, we finally get Dave realizing he needs to stop being a coward because his family is in danger and bravely charges back into combat. And yeah, this is where the episode picks right back up. It's filled with great physical humor and takes advantage of the animation style for ridiculous effect. Dave quickly disposes of the sand monster, and now we have a face-off between Chuckles and Dave. Now this is something I didn't expect to see in a show like this, a beam struggle. Oh shit, Dave just got Gohan'd, bitch. Following this, Dave gets a message from his dad about how pure brawn won't win the day here. He needs to use his brain.
Nah, I'm just a hallucination brought on by stress. Well, gotta go. The annual hallucination costume party's tonight. I'm going as a fairy princess!
Leave it to a show like this to do the last thing you'd expect. Something about this Brock Lesnar-sized man cross-dressing is absolutely hysterical. Plus, I love how Chuckles just stands there and lets Dave communicate with his stress-induced hallucination.
Strength can be defeated, but wisdom cannot. Use your intelligence, Dave.
With that, we get a callback to several of the episode's running jokes. He tricks Chuckles with an origami hat with antlers and does the mating call for the moose-eating Thunderhawk, who promptly scoops up Chuckles and takes him away. It's a clever move and a really intelligent way to pay off everything we've seen thus far in the episode, and I'm also really surprised that they actually used the term mating call. You'd think the term mating call would be a bit too sexual for a show like this, but Dave would beg to differ. So Chuckles gets taken away by a hawk with an incredibly rich voice.
Yeah, I wish I had a nickel every time I heard that story.
Was that Phil Lamar? Oh no, that's Kevin Michael Richardson. Same voice actor for Throcktar and Oswidge. Well, he gives Phil Lamar a run for his money at any rate. That is a sumptuous voice if I ever heard one. Then Candy finally gets her antler hat to end all antler hats. She comes home to show it off, but fashion trends have moved on as they inevitably do. And in spite of how lame the joke originally was, this is actually a really clever payoff to the shop gag in the beginning of the episode. Wow, imagine making up for a joke like that. And that was episode 1/episode 13 of Dave the Barbarian. Way of the Dave. One thing I really don't want this series of videos to become is a play-by-play of everything that happens in each episode, but that's proving harder than I thought because there are so many great moments to bring up that I could pretty much just turn this into a play-by-play or just play the entire episode because I feel like that really is the only way to showcase all the best moments in this show. It's all great moments. I showed you the broad strokes of the episode while also trying to give you a general idea of the best jokes in the entire episode, but there are some ones that I had to leave out, like this one where Dave is monologuing to himself in his head and commenting on how echoey it is.
Why is it so echoey inside my head? Hello, row your boat.
So with all that accounted for, how is this episode overall? Honestly, not great. At least as far as the quality of the entire series is concerned. Obviously, they had a lot to establish in this episode due to it being the hypothetical first time you'll be seeing these characters, but as a result, the overall writing and humor suffered a bit, as there were quite a few jokes that didn't work as they were testing the waters to see what they could do and what they couldn't do. But there was still enough great humor to balance out the misses. I do, however, have other gripes with this episode, particularly the insistence on establishing series-wide running jokes, because while they were certainly established, they were also overused somewhat. I mean, the whole not a monkey thing happens no less than 3 times in the span of about 5 minutes. Dave got obliterated twice and said bejabbers twice. I think this episode was too reliant on running jokes is my point, and not the episode's specific running jokes because those were fine. I'm just talking about the overall running jokes that run throughout the series, which took away from the overall product in this episode. By the time I heard Fang say not a monkey for the 3rd time, I kinda rolled my eyes. Another problem I had was with the slightly too often for comfort forward-facing characters. I think characters facing forward in animated shows very rarely doesn't look uncanny, and this is no exception. I don't remember if this is a running theme for the rest of the series, but I really hope it isn't because, yeah, it doesn't look good. One thing that immediately struck me about this episode, and I'm sure this will continue for the rest of the series, is how the writing is really weirdly intelligent. I'm not talking about the style of writing or the humor, although that is the case as well, as I've already said. I'm talking about the word choices. They use words and phrases that I wouldn't really associate with shows aimed at children, so one of the things that I immediately like about this series revisiting it is that it's in no way patronizing. It doesn't talk down to its audience, and as a matter of fact, the writing is verbose enough that this show expects a lot more out of its audience than a lot of shows from this era and just in general. I really appreciate a series that not only doesn't feel like it's talking down to me, but actually treats me like I'm halfway smart. And that really plays into the humorous aspects of the series. They're able to be more funny because they're able to use more flowery word choices, which is why I think a lot of this show holds up better now than it used to, because I didn't used to understand some of the things they were saying. Therefore, I didn't understand some of the jokes. So it's a very maturely written show and a very maturely written episode in spite of all the dumb humor. However, due to the jokes that fall flat and the somewhat bland conflict, I think this is a bottom tier episode for the show. I'll give it a pass for the fact that it is the pilot, but it does need to pick up in the future if this show is to hold up in any way. I went back and forth on this, but I think I've decided that this episode will get an ultra subjective score of 5 out of 10. It was nearly a 6, but I couldn't give it that. It's still good, but I expect more out of this series. When I grade these episodes, I'm not talking about objective quality necessarily, but more expectations versus reality. I know there's at least one episode in the series that I remember being worse than this off the top of my head, so if this is as bad as it gets other than said episode, then we're in for a treat. I've been Tactical Bacon Productions, saying what I want, when I want. Tune in next time for episode 14, or the second segment of the pilot episode, The Beauty and the Zit. Then after that, we're going to be going off initial air date. And hey, if you like what you see, please consider liking and subscribing. Maybe then my life will have meaning again. If you have any particular favorite moments of this episode, drop it in the comment section. Peace, yo.